Last month marked the 35th anniversary of Rare, formerly known as Rareware. It was a surprisingly subdued affair, with Microsoft celebrating with a compilation of songs from Rare's games released on the streaming platforms, a month-long event in Sea of Thieves, merchandise with Fangamer, and a rebooted release of Battletoads, which is probably the nicest thing I can say about it. While it was great to see Microsoft acknowledge one of its acquisitions in such a way, the celebration pales in comparison to the one they had 5 years earlier with the release of Rare Replay. Rare Replay aims to celebrate 30 years of Rare by bringing together 30 games ranging from 1985 all the way up to 2008 due to reasons we'll get to in a little bit. There's even a few games from Rare's predecessor, Ultimate Play the Game, with the oldest being from 1983. As compilation standards go, it's actually pretty impressive. The emulation is solid, there's a good amount of bonus content, and there's enough features in the emulation itself that's worth celebrating. The best thing about the compilation isn't so much how well it brings together these games, but more how ambitious it is. It's a bit of a weird point, so allow me to explain with a slight tangent about a company you are more than familiar with. Sega has an incredibly storied past and have been doing solid work in terms of getting their back catalogue out there and celebrating their past IP. They could be doing a better job with more of their properties, but I digress. The point I'm trying to make is that despite such a storied past and legacy, Sega is in a nasty habit of constantly re-releasing Mega Drive games, let alone the same set of Mega Drive games. Granted, there are solid reasons why. Emulation of those games is extremely well documented in this day and age, and it's easy money for Sega since they keep selling for some bizarre reason. On top of that, they're extremely no-frills affairs. They work, and that's just about it. Now, this is a behavior that's changing thanks to hardware like the Mega Drive Mini, Game Gear Micro, and the Astro City Mini, but it's something about Sega that still doesn't sit well with me. How does this relate to Rare Replay? Well, covering 30 years of games means that it brings together releases from a number of different systems, from the various British microcomputers of the 80s to more standard fare like the NES, before getting a bit more obscure with the likes of the Nintendo 64 and their arcade work, closing out with the Xbox and Xbox 360. It's a fair effort, especially considering that most compilations will focus on a specific console or one or two arcade ports to emulate, so seeing so many different types of systems represented here is kinda nuts. Rare did the work to ensure that the games presented here are the best official ways to play them, particularly for their pre-N64 releases. Aside from every game having a set of achievements, there's the standard stuff like filters, screen modes, and save states, but they go one step further with the inclusion of rewinding, something that really hadn't been done in official compilations at the time. The N64 games also have some control scheme changes should the older controls not be palatable to modern sensibilities, making something like Jet Force Gemini infinitely more playable. Yet that's not the most interesting addition. For the pre-N64 games, Rare includes a feature called Snapshots, basically set save states to take small slices of the game and present them as a micro-challenge. These include things like scoring a certain amount of points in a small time frame, defeating enemies without taking hits, that sort of thing. They're a pretty cool way of isolating specific moments of the game and giving players the ability to practice. There's even one that allows you to play the infamous Turbo Tunnel sequence from Battletoads infinitely, should you wish to challenge it for longer than the achievement asks of you. As for the games and collected themselves, they do a pretty good job of highlighting the variety of games Rare's made over the years, and tell a good narrative in showing how much technology and game design has changed since the days of the ZX Spectrum. Not every game is a hit, but that was Rare in a nutshell. They were making a lot of licensed crap before they really hit the stride of the mid-90s. Amazingly, the compilation features one of the deepest cuts one could have come up with, the Battletoads arcade game, originally published by Electronic Arts in one of their very few arcade outings. The last Battletoads game to be released until the 2020 game is the darkest iteration of the game to date, thanks to not only its color palette, but also the action on screen. Look, it's fine enough, there were certainly better arcade brawlers released at the time, but it being saved from the depths of obscurity is one of the more surprising aspects of this collection. Personally, I gravitated way more towards the Nintendo 64 games, if only because those were the ones I never really had much experience with. I never owned the system at the time. The N64 games represent some of the strongest picks in the compilation. Perfect Dark and the two Banjo games hold up fine enough, Conker's Bad Fur Day and Jet Force Gemini are interesting relics of their respective time, KL Gold is fine, but the one that held my interest the most has been 1997's Blast Corps. Blast Corps sees you destroying buildings in the path of a missile carrier using a wide variety of vehicles. It sounds simple enough, but steadily layers on complexity as you go on. Levels will eventually see you switching between vehicles and engaging in some serious puzzle work to get through levels. Not to mention the vehicles themselves play radically differently from one another. You've got bulldozers, two different types of mechs that destroy buildings in wildly different ways, and a truck where you have to drift into buildings to destroy them with its metal bed. It's a challenging and unique game, and a proper cult classic too. Naturally, as with any compilation, there are some missions. The Xbox 360 Kinect doesn't work with the Xbox One, so their two Kinect sports games aren't present here. On top of that, anything with characters or properties that Rare doesn't own aren't present, and this forms a lot of what Rare did. Seriously, one just has to look at the output from 1987 up until about 1992 to give you an idea. None of Rare's Super Nintendo or Game Boy Advance games are present either for most of the same reasons, which is a shame because it would have been interesting to see something like their Ken Griffey Jr. baseball game for the SNES present, something that I didn't even know existed until the making of this video. This also means several of Rare's most iconic and genre-defining games aren't present. None of their Donkey Kong games are here, understandably, as is GoldenEye 007. This one is slightly less of a painful omission, given that Perfect Dark fills the role of N64 first-person shooter well enough, but given its historical significance and how it influenced an entire genre, look, I'm not going to say it would have justified a purchase of an Xbox One at a time where Microsoft seriously needed a win, but as far as celebrating one of the legacies of its developers, look, it would have been a massive get. Where Rare Replay really comes alive is that it led the push for Microsoft backwards compatible efforts for the Xbox One. Before Rare Replay launch, all of Rare's non-Kinect Xbox 360 games were part of the initial batch of backwards compatible efforts, which made sense given the impending release of the collection, but really surprising when you consider this is before some of the more iconic properties like Gears of War or Halo. Effectively being the launch title for this feature is kind of really awesome, and the most fitting one to boot. It highlights the simplicity of use and the improvements made. Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts is a game that definitely benefits from this, thanks to a lot of improvements in its frame rates. And hey, how often can one say that they were involved in basically launching a system feature that's become one of the brand's major selling points? I think a lot of game compilations should look to Rare Replay as an example of what to do. It's a collection that brings together a good amount of obscure and well-known games, makes them easily accessible and the best ways to play them, and wraps them with some unique and genuinely cool features and tools to make them really palatable for modern tastes. It's a fantastic celebration of one of gaming's more eclectic developers, and it sets such a good template for collections like this that I wish it was more the standard rather than the exception.